Alrighty. This is a book that is very intriguing. Very intriguing. Talking about World War II. And we went into partial war, and then at a point they declared total war. During that time, we had serious manpower issues. They had a guy called Deadman who actually told people not to buy too many Christmas presents because it would be too much of an unnecessary weight on the production issues. Spend Christmas soberly, confidently, realistically. I'm glad you can actually see the text. We had ration goods, ration food and shit like that. They had it slightly worse in England in regards to food rationing, but our labour shortage was bloody chronic. And there was actually a ban on the mention of Santa Claus and his sleigh, so they had to talk about having a ride in the fairy coach instead, and your old friend in his castle. At least they didn't say fairy meadow. So anyway, I'm going to go through some of the more interesting pieces of this. I haven't been reading this, and I should have, because I'm got to hand it in a couple of days. This is a ripper. One of the first ones they got into was, obviously they stripped out all the young men and they all went off to war-related stuff. It got ridiculous to the point that old guys who had retired and overage workers, as they call them, old guys who probably only a few years off dropping dead, were recruited in boring factory jobs, and some of the munitions workers and particularly the fabric workers and the camouflage net makers happened to be maids of the rich, and they grabbed quite a bunch of domestic servants as they saw it. Here's a bit of a piss take on it. Now, before you leave us, Sarah, I must know how to peel the eggs before frying them. Yeah, they used to have raids to check on what's his names, people who weren't working, particularly kids of the rich and whatnot. And they had a real tendency to go to all the rich places, and like as in the rich pubs and the dance halls and all this sort of stuff that were sort of frequented by the rich. And there's people there who were businessmen who got caught up in it. Farmers got caught up in it. First day they've had off for 2 years, only to be told they're too bloody lazy. And one guy complained that he's had literally 7 staff taken off him on a sheep farm of 10,000 sheep. He's doing the whole lot on his own, barely holding it together, has his first day off in 2 years and gets busted in this raid on a high-end pub, and then told that he's a lazy bastard. And of course he fairly spat the dummy at that one. There was a sort of a this sort of horses for courses in the way that the rich used to complain that they have it hard. And, I'm putting in my hard slog, yet their hard slog was jack shit compared to the poor people's hard slog. Here's one of the ones that turned up in the newspaper. I have quite a large home in Toorak. Fucking snob central. Still is snob central today. Plenty of money in that place. There's a couple of places that have got more rich people, but there's plenty of millionaires there. And there's another place or two that actually has multi-millionaires. I own quite a large home in Toorak. I'm a mother of 2, not 3, young children. I don't know why she put not 3. I have now only minimum help and have to carry in all foodstuffs. Have to carry in all foodstuffs. Oh, my heart bleeds piss for you. Will Mr. Deadman advise me whether to neglect my children and husband, give up my house, home, or break down? For one person cannot do impossibilities. Most women are prepared to assist the war effort in every way, but this is going a step too far. And this woman called herself one of many in the letters to the editor, and another woman replied as another of many. I'm a mother of 8, not 2, and up to the last 12 months have done everything, including making bread, preserves, jam, and clothes. I have never had tradesmen calling except with milk and ice. In other words, she didn't have anybody else to do any of the physical labour. She didn't have maids or anything, except the guy who dropped off the ice and the milkman. I'm continually being complimented on the children, husband, meals, and home, and am in the best of health myself. If your correspondent did her own work cheerfully, she'd be better, feel better, and have no thought of breakdowns. There was another woman who worked in a onion peeling factory. She had to ride on a bicycle 2 hours to work, would peel onions, hopefully underwater because it's a bitch peeling them above water, for 12 hours a day, ride another 2 hours back, and then start cooking tea for her husband and kids. Something like that it was. Might have been 10 hours a day she worked, but it was just like, it's a fucking wonder people didn't just collapse altogether. And this went on, and they had a lousy 3 or 4 days off for the Christmas in 1942. 1942, 1943, especially 42, it was almost a collapse on the home front. They faced the fuel crisis of, I should start looking up a bit of this stuff. Munitions workers. The fuel crisis of 42, they could have a certain amount of wood per week, and unfortunately they didn't have enough people to actually cut this wood, and as a result, they had a pretty severe shortage of wood in 1942. Now, back in those days, everybody used to have wood stoves, much like the one I got behind me, and chip heaters, which sort of wood-fired hot water, and all that sort of stuff. They had rationing on the amount of wood you could get. When you did get the wood, it was so bloody green you couldn't burn it, and the amount of wood you got, realistically, by the time you cook your food and whatnot, you can have a bath. You could only have 5 inches of water in your bath. That's right, 5 inches of water in your bath to have a warm bath because you were so short on wood. They called it the fuel crisis of 1942. Then they started to get over immigrants who look like a bunch of half-confused East Europeans from the photos in here, in around 42, end of 42, and in 43 they alleviated a bit of the problem. Trouble was that they were only cutting 4 tonnes per week per man, and in those days they expected a bit more, and the local newspaper in the capital, who is still going, stated that the average housewife could cut that much, so how the hell are these East European men only cutting that amount? This guy here wrote a thing about his work in munitions or something like that, 1,200 times an hour. He had to 1,200 movements an hour or something like that. I used 3 machines, on one using both hands, both feet and eyes, treadling treading the pedal 6,600 times, 1,100 motions, both hands and eyes, on each of 2 other machines, total 8,800 motions or operations in 7.5 hours, nearly 1,200 an hour. The rate is actually higher. For temporary rest must be stolen on some excuse. It was, yeah, hard to say the least. Here's the one about the potato peeling. Onion peeling, rather. Onion peeling factory. Worked from... This was one of the women who... yeah, they had a raid on a particular thing. I think... one woman turned up carrying a baby and easily secured an exemption. Another young mother also turned up, and an alert official noticed it was the same bloody baby. Both women were sent to work in a cannery. They didn't have sort of forced labour. Initially, the laws didn't allow for forced labour, but highly encouraged them to move into these industries. And then there was a second round of laws which actually gave them the power to basically put you into forced labour, like bloody communism. Just, you're going to fucking go to this cannery, this munitions factory, because we say so, and that's all there is to it. They realised that sort of shit wasn't going to run too well, and although they had the power to do it, they never exercised that power, because most people pretty much played ball. When the war, when the Americans turned up and whatnot, that sort of alleviated a lot of the problems. Americans thought that we were sort of loafing off because we took so many of our soldiers out of the war. My grandfather, in his last days in Papua New Guinea, was fighting alongside Americans, and he was fucking flabbergasted at the amount of shit they had per soldier. And he said every knick-knack-knock you could imagine, they had it. They used to call them ghost soldiers because they'd carry so much stuff in their pack. They'd carry a cooking kit as well, you know, like a little mess kit, like a little aluminium frying pan, all that sort of stuff, like, you know, little pot with a folding handle and all that. He couldn't believe it. He said they used to carry, you know, around, it was a huge amount, nearly 100 pounds worth of shit, he reckoned, about 45 kilos worth of stuff, and he said they used to call them ghost soldiers because by the time they get to the place they had to get to, they were friggin' worn out from carrying so much shit in their backpack, whereas the soldiers of Australia didn't, and they didn't have their own mess kits, and they didn't have their own tent in their backpack, and all this other shit that the Americans had. And as a result, going up and down the steep, not hills, but mountainsides of Papua New Guinea, it used to wear them out. He told me a few of their fighting tactics and different stuff. And he said all had big rings, all smoking cigars, and he said the jeeps, he said they'd load the bejesus out of jeeps. He said it didn't mean a damn thing to see 12 and sometimes 18 people in a jeep. He said one time he saw 22 people in a jeep because he actually counted. And these were the Willys jeeps. And he said he had one turn up there, and they had literally a dozen people or 15 people on. They said, "Do you want a ride?" And he goes, "No, I'll be right, mate. I'll just keep walking." And he said, "If I had got on, I would have had pretty much nothing to hang off. And the first bump we hit, he probably would have fell out anyway." But anyway, yeah, he said it's the first time he ever saw tea bags. And he said, you know, here Americans are primarily drinking coffee, not tea, and yet he saw tea bags and he couldn't fucking believe it. He was shocked that, you know, you could put this paper in the water and it wouldn't just fall to bits on you. You know, he said, never seen him in his life before. Couldn't believe it. Anyway, around when the Americans turned up, we pulled a lot of people out. The Americans thought we weren't pulling our weight. What they didn't realise, we had a near collapse on our hands in terms of just keeping the home front going, just keeping shit taped together at home. With the firewood shortage, people started using a hell of a lot of town gas, which is basically coal gas with the sulfur dioxide taken out of it. It's one of the synthesis gases that you can get out of a gasifier, but it's highly corrosive because of the sulfur dioxide. But they get all that shit out with slated lime, generally, back in those days, and then release it into the air, and it smells like rotten eggs, and you'll get a friggin' headache if you sniff it. It's poisonous. But anyway, they used a hell of a lot of that, or tried to use a fair bit of that in response to the firewood shortage, but then they told people, go easy on the shit. And they actually had restrictions on that and would only allow you to light it for a certain amount of hours in the morning per day. But they kept those restrictions only for 3 days. But it was to put the wind up people so they didn't overuse the coal gas and basically fucking run the joint out of coal gas to offset the fact they couldn't get much firewood. Of course, not everybody had coal gas available for every appliance, because they had some coal gas appliances and some that were just wood-fired, but a lot of the coal gas, I think, might have been more hot water-related stuff, and I believe I have a wood chip heater that is designed to run on that town gas, which is essentially coal gas with the sulfur dioxide removed. Yes, where was I now? Yep. Onion peeling factory. She went from 7:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. Peeling by hand onions that were then dehydrated before being sent to the troops. It is hard to imagine a more monotonous job. Well, try sticking bolts in radiators for hours and hours a day, because I've done that too. Anyway. Never mind. One of the onion peelers revealed that she lived at Murrumbeena. I actually went for a job interview at a tile manufacturing place there once, many years ago. Rose at 5 a.m. every morning, cycled 2 miles to the railway station to reach the factory by 7 a.m. So she, I got it wrong. She didn't cycle 2 hours, she cycled 2 miles. But by the time she got up, by the time she got to the factory, it was 2 hours. 2 hours. Yeah, by the time she had breakfast and got to the factory. She arrived home at 7 p.m, because obviously 5 p.m. knock-off, 2 hours to get back. Might have had to wait for the train for a little while there. And then turned to her other job, the care of family and home. Shit. Could you imagine people today doing shit like this? You know, imagine getting a millennial and telling them they had to do work like that, and taking their fucking iPhone off them as well to make sure that they got work done. Imagine, they'd chuck a fucking tantrum. They'd be hopeless. Sponges and lounge lizards were what they were trying to sort out. They had luxury parlours, and some of the big ones they closed, and people who worked at the other ones were shitting bricks that they were going to be closed and all sent to bloody canneries. And the other thing was they actually would get, not only would they have to work a lot harder, they'd get like way less pay. So they didn't like that. They burst in on this joint, afternoon tea dances at Prince's and Romana's. In question about 300 people. Half of them bolted to the friggin' shitter, didn't they, of course. And certainly few of the thousands of overworked Australians who had sacrificed even their traditional Christmas break would shed too many tears. Few would shed too many tears about raids on these symbols of Sydney's high society. Oh, not the shitter, they went in the cloakrooms. And the officials made it clear that they would not depart until everyone had been interviewed. So everyone decided maybe they better come out of the cloakrooms. One of these dodgers was a 74-year-old woman, they're stirring shit with her, who seemed relieved to discover the official was being factitious, talking shit, when he had said, "For trying to dodge us, we'll put you in an anti-aircraft unit." In other words, on the AA guns, reloading the great big bloomin' .50 BMGs or whatever. into their bloody anti-aircraft weapon and sitting there with their helmets on in a little bloody concrete pillbox, hammering away with a big thud and noise, just waiting for a bomb to hit the top of the bloody pillbox. But trying to dodge us would put you in an anti-aircraft unit. That's a pretty smart one to say to a 74-year-old woman. And she thought he was serious. One woman who was caught says, "I'm cooked now, I'm not employed, so it looks like it's the factories for me." The music resumed after the raids had begun, but many patrons, after they dealt with officials, decided, fuck this, I'm going home. Here's the old guys. Top hats and all. Moustaches and the whole bit. He looks like he's ready to just about cark it. Working in an aircraft factory. If I'm not incorrect, they may be manufacturing part of a wing there. It got so ridiculous that we dropped to basically, pretty much below the stages that the Nazis had dropped to. It got to the point that any boy 16 years or over was considered a major for the purposes of work. And Hitler was going to start using 15-year-old boys and didn't. And right here you got 13 and 14-year-olds checking eggs for cracks in basically, a place where they obviously, package eggs up after they've obviously come from where the chickens have been laying them, whether that was barn. I assume it was in those days. I don't know if they actually had battery hens back then. And there they are, lining up for the manpower office in August 1943, right in my state capital. No shit. We started employing 14-year-olds. Purely out of... that one there is just helping out with school holiday, during school holidays, because it was literally that bad. They sent a bunch of them off to a camp to try and cut wood too, in either 42 or 43, and as a result that didn't really do shit, and the state premier, or the governor so to speak, really questioned the whole point of it, because it was pretty much a waste of effort. Unfortunately, women were, all the roles were so, this is a man's job, that's a woman's job, the woman stays at home, blah, 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 all that sort of stuff. Pre-feminism, obviously. Now I reckon it's gone a bit too far the other way with feminism, but anyways, keeping to the point, some unions in some states had trouble with it and others didn't, with women moving into jobs that were traditionally men. And apparently when it came to manufacturing submachine guns, women actually produced them 15 times faster. 15% faster, because the guys would usually chat and have a cigarette, and as a result they'd slow down a bit. But women, as you may know, they can sort of do two things at once, and one of the Labor guys there, I think it was the manager there, supervisor, something, said, I don't know, it must be the legacy of knitting, that they wouldn't stop while they talked like the men would. They would actually continue to assemble the guns as they were talking, and as a result they got 15% more weapons built than men when it came to the Owen submachine gun, of which there is still a handful in collectors' hands in the United States, and a lot of them here got dumped in the sea, and some of them got buried under a football field. Sad end to a very, very high quality, good blooming submachine gun. Fixed bolt, fixed firing pin, open bolt, and fixed firing pin. It was a bizarre design in a way, but ejector was built into the magazine. It was a 15-degree angle from above that the magazine would come in, so your sights were there, and then your magazine come in from the top and ejected out the bottom. And I think they only came into use part way through my grandfather being there, because initially they were there with Tommy guns and Lewis guns. Anyway, they managed to obviously do a lot of fabrics and make, here they're making parachutes and obviously camouflage netting and carting around ice, and I think that was in Western Australia. They'd cart ice, and here in the state capital that I'm in, delivering bread. To keep bread fresh, or, you know, one of the things, just like they delivered milk, they also delivered bread back in the day. So you get fresh bread sort of thing guaranteed, and it was probably to do with refrigeration not being any much more than basically a steel enamel box with asbestos insulation and a lump of ice in there. That was as good as your refrigeration got. Oh no, I was wrong. Brisbane, here it is there. They're delivering ice. Usually you'd wear gloves for that. They're not wearing gloves. And yeah, women done a lot of those sort of kinds of jobs. Although it doesn't mean they didn't do a lot of factory work, munitions work, assembling stuff. There's another woman carrying around bread. Yeah. The Yanks, literally, the higher your rank went, you sometimes got threefold of the equivalent rank. There's MacArthur. Threefold the wages of the equivalent rank. If you were a lieutenant colonel, you got something like threefold the wages as a Yank compared to the lieutenant colonels of Australia. It was about double the wage when you were just a GI.